Thank you for joining me today. My name is Karima Sauer. I'm the HPE Channel Manager at Arrow, covering the East region. And today we'll be discussing Simplivity and its many advanced features that are native to the Simplivity OS that I feel truly help to set it apart from others in the HCI industry. So sit back, enjoy the show.
Before we get into the HPE Simplivity solution, I want to ask you to look at this technology through a totally different lens. It's widely accepted these days that there is a data storage challenge, as data storage is growing at an astronomical rate. Now, I'm sure many of you have seen either this or a variation of this chart, but if you look at this, in 2020, we currently have 40 zettabytes of information, of data storage globally. How much is a zettabyte? A zettabyte is 1 billion terabytes, and we are currently at 40 zettabytes. Within 5 years, so not that far out from today, we will be at 175 zettabytes, so an increase of 135. Interestingly enough, 90 of those zettabytes will be from IoT devices, and also, just a factoid, 90% of all data in existence today was created within the past 2 years. Now, most data storage companies are approaching this as a storage problem, and they're focusing on making larger, faster, and more storage drives per system. HPE Simplivity is the only one that approached this as a data problem, not a storage problem. And Simplivity actually virtualizes data, much like VMware virtualizes compute. You see, once VMware virtualized compute, the anchor that was being dragged around the data center and from data center to data center became the large volumes of storage. Well, HPE Simplivity is the only solution on the market today that has truly virtualized data. Let me show you in a little more detail exactly what they've done. So if you were to ask me to share the 15-second Simplivity elevator pitch, here's what I would tell you. HPE feels that the entire legacy stack of IT infrastructure, which we see here on the left, has become too costly and too complicated to purchase, implement, manage, maintain, scale. So they assimilated all the features and functionality that we see on the left into a 2U platform that scales out seamlessly to meet your business needs. Now, all infrastructure below the hypervisor is functionally residing in the server environment, which in this case is the HPE Simplivity DL380, which is also the most widely sold and secure server on the planet. Let me explain to you exactly how they've done that. First, let's take a look at exactly what the HPE Simplivity solution is. In doing that, let me explain how we actually virtualize data. First, if we take off the bezel and open up the server, you'll see it's a standard x86 server with resources like SSD, DRAM, and an x86 CPU. And just like any other host, we're running VMware ESXi. What HPE has done is pop the top on the server and insert the data virtualization platform, which I'll call the DVP from now on, which is a PCI card that has a Simplivity data virtualization software on board. Now, when all the data comes into the environment, it hits the DVP first, where it gets deduplicated, compressed, and optimized inline at inception once and forever, never to be rehydrated, through all tiers of resources locally and all locations wherever you have a Simplivity node globally. Let me repeat that because this is very important. The DVP duplicates, compresses, and optimizes all data at inception inline through all the tiers of storage once and forever at all locations globally, wherever you have a Simplivity node. Now, if we look at the DVP from a simplistic view, we have the data management layer. That's where the work gets done. And the presentation layer, which simply keeps the applications apprised of what work was done. Let's take a look at the right path. the first thing that happens in a new write request from SQL comes in. It hits the DVP where it's recognized as a unique write. So it's compressed and optimized and sent down to the disk. Another request for a write comes down from Exchange, and the DVP sees that it's also unique, so it is sent to the disk. SAP sends another request for a write down. It's unique. We'll compress that also and write it to disk. Now, SQL sends a request for a write down to the DVP, and the DVP sees that block already exists from Exchange. So no IO is issued, and a pointer is sent to the app. SAP sends a write down, and that is also deduped. So what's happened here? So far, 5 requests for write were issued, and the system eliminated 2 out of 5. Now, when we speed this up, the real impact of the DVP hits you. Notice the amount of large, heavy writes that come into the DVP and how much less of that ends up being issued as IO to the server resources. This is huge because even though on the previous slide we only eliminated 2 of 5 IO requests, Simplivity customers today are averaging a 57-to-1 data efficiency, which means that for every 57 terabytes of write requests issued, only 1 terabyte is written. More importantly, 56 terabytes of IO is eliminated, thus freeing up the server resources to do what they should do, which is run the applications. Remember, the fastest IO is the one that you don't have to do. Tech Validate interviews Simplivity customers before implementation and after Simplivity implementation. And they found that 92% of Simplivity customers recognized at least a 25% enhancement in the performance of their applications. 51% of customers saw at least a 50% performance improvement. These business benefits are a result of the technology energy that the DVP saved from the server resources so that those server resources could stay dedicated to running the applications with the maximum amount of technology energy that you purchased. That right there is a true business impact of data virtualization. Now, in this case, from a storage standpoint, the system got a 10-to-1 storage deduplication. However, I should mention that the Simplivity solution guarantees a 90% reduction of your total storage environment. And that includes production and backup storage. I'll explain that a little more when we get into the native data protection of Simplivity. So now let's review the actual Simplivity topology. First, let me share that we are a true one-click upgrade scale-out platform. We recommend that the initial footprint be 2 nodes since that builds in true high availability. But the good news is that with Simplivity, you don't need a 10 gig switch because you can simply direct connect 2 nodes from the backplane. Adding a third or more node to the federation is as simple as plugging it into the network, selecting it in the GUI, and 1 click to add the new node to your existing Simplivity federation. Now, in traditional storage arrays, there's always the inevitable data migration or refresh event, and we know how labor intensive and how time intensive those can be. But with Simplivity, you just plug your new node into the federation, go over and right click on the refresh node on the left, do a Simplivity evacuate. You go home, you have dinner, watch your favorite program, and all the VMs and their associated data stores and policies are automatically moved into the rest of the environment. You come back to work in the morning and you have an email stating evacuation complete. You disconnect the old node and you're done. Now, let's say this is a VDI environment and you want to add, let's say 200 users. In today's environment with COVID-19, this is a scenario that we are running into more and more. A lot of folks are having to work remotely. They want to have their desktop where they work. And so we have seen a very large surge in requests for VDI. So this is a very realistic scenario. Simplivity is so efficient with storage, you most likely won't need to add more storage, but you do need more compute power to handle the new users. Well, you can just buy an HPE server, plug it into the switch, and all the resources from that server are automatically added to the pool. There is also a cloud gateway that should be coming in the next quarter in the box. So if you want to archive off to a public cloud, then you would simply activate the gateway. Now, this is where Simplivity really gets interesting when we talk about the incredible data protection. There is an actual guarantee that comes with Simplivity. The important thing to remember with the built-in data protection is that it's native. So that is a huge differentiating feature. And it's included in the price of the unit. Let's take a look at what makes these protection tools different from anything else in the industry. If we take a look at an example of best practices in backups these days, they're still called snaps or snapshots, depending on which manufacturer you're talking about. You have multiple VMs sharing a data store. So let's say the gray VM on the left is the primary VM and wants to be backed up hourly. So 1 hour later, that policy triggers a backup, thus snapping the entire data store. And all the sharing VMs also get backed up, regardless of their individual policies. Next hour, the policy triggers another snap. And then let's say that the VM over on the right wants to get backed up 8 times a day. So on the 3rd hour, that policy triggers that snap, and they all get backed up yet again, and so on, and so on. So here we see that after 6 snaps or backups, we've added 3 terabytes of storage to the overall storage environment. This is an incredibly inefficient utilization of storage resources developed by data storage companies. Now, Simplivity does not run snaps for backups. They do what's called a full logical volume backup, which means that each VM has its own data store, and when the backup policy triggers a backup, the metadata is changed to reflect what the VM looked like at that time. Now, a metadata change is roughly 127K of storage, which is literally a 0-byte backup. So after your first backup, all others are free from a storage standpoint. I repeat, Simplivity backups add 0 storage after the first backup. And the best part is the compute to run the backup comes from the DVP. So there is 0 IO drain on the server environment, therefore no contention with application performance during backups. Now, what's really amazing is how Simplivity replicates. Rather than start with this slide, let's talk through a real-life example to introduce you to Simplivity remote replication. So let's say the application is iBooks, and I buy the book War and Peace, which is a huge book, which, by the way, I've tried to read twice and never got through it, but it has over 587,000 words in it. In a typical replication environment, I would take the 587,000 words, make a VM out of it, along with some operating system information and VMware identifiers, and make a huge VM from it. I would then send that over the network to New York or to my backup location, where I back up all my books. Most customers tell me that the first time seed will take 6, 7, maybe 8 or 9 hours, but it'll get there eventually. Now, if this were the Simplivity environment, here's what I would do. I would immediately send the metadata rebuild map to the backup location while deduping the book in my mind. The metadata rebuild map is just like when you open a box of Legos, and there are the directions that show you how many of each color block is in the box, as well as instructions on how do I build this figure, whether it's a car or a truck or a dinosaur or whatever. This takes very little bandwidth to send over the pipe. Now, think of this. The words the, he, she, of, pistol, sergeant, battle, war, rifle, etc. There are only about 8,000 unique words that are used over and over to make up that book. So I would tell the replication node, without sending anything over the pipe, what those 8,000 words are. And the replication node responds with, well, I already have 7,000 of those words here from other books that I'm backing up for you. So it only really pulls 1,000 words over the network, matches those words to the 7,000 existing in the backup environment, and rebuilds the book or the VM in about 45 seconds. That's powerful stuff. That's how we virtualize data globally. Now, if we take a look at how that translates to this slide, let's say you have a data center in San Francisco with 3 Simplivity nodes, and let's say you have another one in New York. Whenever you have a Simplivity node in the world, they're connected by the DVP. This creates a Simplivity federation, or a global network of resources to manage your VMs, all from the same single pane of glass. Within this global federation, you can start to do some really interesting things. Let's see what happens, for example, when you want to do a local backup. With Simplivity, you just right-click in vCenter and press Backup. At that point, you get a full logical backup at the speed of a snap. How? Because we don't have to write any new data, by definition, with a local backup, the data already exists. All that needs to happen is a metadata update for any changed blocks since the last full backup, which we can do at 10-minute RPOs if we want. We can typically back up a local VM in seconds, and you'll see that a little bit later. Perhaps even more interesting, what if you wanted to do a remote backup? Well, you wouldn't want to send all of that data over the WAN, since it could take forever. So instead, with the power of the DVP, you can just right-click in vCenter and press Remote Backup. At that point, instead of sending the data, we'll just send the metadata map. The remote data center, in this case New York, will look at its shared resource pool to see what data at granular 8K it already has and what data it's missing. Then it's smart enough to only request the data that it's missing. San Francisco only sends across the unique data needed to complete the full logical backup on the remote site. A simple metaphor might be a deck of cards. If you have 52 cards in San Francisco and your buddy is missing 3 cards in New York, why would you send all 52? Instead, just send the 3 cards he's missing. From there, you can restore your VMs on the other side and be back up and running in minutes. This is a great case for operational restore, for test dev around the globe, for disaster recovery, all natively built in by design with the Simplivity DVP. This independent survey from a company called Tech Validate shows that before the implementation of Simplivity, 6% of customers were getting restores in minutes, 34% in hours, 52% in days, and 8% in weeks. That's a full 60% of people or companies who couldn't get restores any faster than days or weeks. Now, I don't know about you, but companies that are like that will probably not be in business for very long if they're unable to recover. After Simplivity is installed, 63% of those customers are now restoring within minutes and 29% in hours. That's 92% of Simplivity customers are now getting perfectly acceptable RTOs of minutes to hours. So let's recap for a moment what we've learned. We virtualized your data, building in incredible data efficiency. You can add compute separately. Backups are free and fast from a storage and compute standpoint. Replication is incredible, and we can virtualize the data globally. And all restores are incredibly fast. So what more could we do for the customers in the name of simplification? Well, the entire environment is managed by one pane of glass, vCenter. Let's take a look at this in a little bit more detail. This customer here has 346 terabytes of total storage in their environment. The purple bar shows that there's about 11 terabytes in production data. The bar underneath shows that there are about 225 terabytes of local backup, and the gray bar below that shows that there's 111 terabytes of remote backups. But when we look over on the right side, you see that there's only 6.1 terabytes that are actually being stored to disk. We've eliminated over 340 terabytes of storage for this customer. More importantly, we've eliminated over 340 terabytes of I/O that never had to take place, thus redirecting what would have been wasted technology energy to run the applications faster and more predictably. So let's look at exactly what this means for our customers. Here you have a typical data center setup that we see today with a local data center and a remote data center. Since Simplivity is a server on steroids, the first thing we do is take the place of the server environment. Now, when you vMotion the storage into the Simplivity environment, it hits the DVP first, where it's virtualized at inception once and forever, locally and globally. So when that total storage footprint is vMotioned into the Simplivity environment, it becomes substantially less. Since we have already deduped, compressed, and optimized at inception, there's no longer the need for WAN optimization. And since we have also deduped at inception once and forever, there's no longer the need for deduped devices. We now have much better efficiency on the network. Remember, we sent 1,000 words of War and Peace, not all 587,000. There's a cloud gateway coming soon, so if you want to archive off to a public cloud, that's a coming option. Because it's an all-flash array, with our data efficiency, in most cases, we have plenty of performance for your Tier 1 apps. However, there are always apps like OLTP, very large databases, or video that just simply need dedicated screaming fast I/O. So you just use a Primera or a Nimble array for that, and let Simplivity run the rest of your environment with incredible efficiency. Data protection is native to the operating system, and it's award-winning. 2+1 is the most common entry configuration, 2 locally for HA, and local backups, and 1 remotely for remote replication. VMware is in the box, so if your customers aren't virtualized, then you simply sell them the license. If they already have VMware, then you just transfer the licenses in. Of course, you have the Simplivity DVP. So remember, you already transferred your VMs into the box when you vMotioned into the environment. And there you have it, data center in a box. Simplivity brings our customers the best of both worlds. Cloud economics with web scale, plus the native best-of-breed enterprise capabilities of awesome data protection, incredible data efficiency, predictably faster performance, and yes, 1 single pane of glass to manage your environment, locally and globally, and that is vCenter. So let's take a look at some real-life examples of what we've done for a couple of customers. But trust me, we have thousands of happy customers around the world. Here we have an example of the 21st largest finance company in the world today. As you can see, they had 2 data centers in each hemisphere, as they couldn't back up across hemispheres around the globe because of latency issues. This customer had made the decision to go to AWS after entertaining discussions with all the major IT providers out there. But then a partner brought Simplivity into the Phoenix data center, and they just got it the first time around. So they did a proof of concept for 6 months, but what they were really doing was running a financial model on Simplivity. They eventually decided to award the business to Simplivity, even though they already had a contract with AWS, stating that their model showed Simplivity to be 43% cheaper than AWS just from an acquisition standpoint. They also estimated that Simplivity would take over $100 million out of their IT spend over the next 5 years. In fact, Simplivity gave them an 11-to-1 data center footprint reduction, and due to our global virtualization, they were able to cut back to 1 data center per hemisphere. And we're on course to saving them slightly more than that $100 million of IT spend over the first 5 years. So here you have just one of 3 rows in just one of their data centers. After the implementation of Simplivity, this is what you have. You have 3 racks of HPE Simplivity. Not 3 rows, 3 racks. Here's another example. Here you have a customer who has 166 rack units. That's about 4 racks of equipment. We can see that they have some EVA, they have IBM, EMC DMX storage, and they also have 4 user interfaces to manage the environment, probably with at least a couple of storage admins. After the implementation of Simplivity, you see they now have 12 rack units with 1 management interface, which is vCenter. And they have 4 more rack units 100 miles away for DR. And finally, here is the Simplivity Hyper Guarantee, which is actually in the Simplivity end user license agreement. Everything we talked about today comes with that guarantee. HPE will give you free gear or full right if these expectations are not met. So we guarantee that we will save you 90% capacity that you're using today if you use Simplivity for both primary and backup storage. We guarantee that you can back up or restore a 1 terabyte VM in 60 seconds or less. Everything is right-click functionality. You can back up, restore, clone, or move a VM with just 3 clicks. Now, finally, let me recap the incredible unique benefits that Simplivity brings to your customer's data center. First and foremost, we virtualize your data once and forever at inception, locally and globally. Next, the elimination of all that unnecessary I/O is redirected to run your apps faster and more predictably. Our backup is native to our OS, not integrated into the environment, and backups are free from a storage and compute standpoint. We use a combination of RAID and RAIN for the strongest protection in the HCI industry. We offer linear scalability with one-click upgrades to your environment. Our global virtualization of data makes our global replication absolutely incredibly efficient and fast. And this whole environment is managed by one pane of glass, vCenter. So let's bring a little reality to what we've just discussed with a real-life story. I was training a partner a while back, and one of the reps asked me to visit some of his accounts with him. There was this one customer who loved what he heard, so he asked us to give him a quote. 2 weeks later, the customer calls us and he says, geez, I loved what you guys had to say, but your quote is for $305,000 and your competition is at $202,000. You have to help me understand that. So I said, okay, Mr. Customer, first, do you feel that RAID is an important protection scheme for all your tier 1 apps? He said, yeah, for all my apps. Why? Well, first off, our competition is using RAIN for data protection, which means all data is striped across the drives upon ingestion. I can tell by the product number that you had given me, my competition is quoting RF2, which is redundancy factor of 2. So with RF2, when you take a server down for maintenance, if you lose even one drive, you will lose data. Do you ever take a server down for maintenance? And he said, yeah, of course. And what's the most common part in the data center to fail? Drives, right? Yeah. With our solution, we use RAID and RAIN, which means that if you have 2 nodes and you take one down for maintenance, you can lose up to 3 drives before you will lose any data. So that said, my competition owes you another quote for more hardware in order to convert their quote to what they call RF3. And that'll give them the same data protection as our solution. However, you need to understand that when you convert from RF2 to RF3, you'll be losing roughly 30% of your available storage since they'll be making a third copy of the data. The customer said, wow, I didn't realize that. Well, what else should I know? So I continued. I said, I bet you have a meeting coming up with a company called Veeam. They're going to come in and show you an equally cool backup solution to what's already included in the current price. They'll then size your backup environment and be providing you with a quote for that backup. And I'll bet you have a meeting with Zerto coming up soon as well. They'll be showing you a replication solution and then sizing and quoting you that solution on top of what you're already starting to add up in your head. So at this point, the customer was starting to understand that there was a lot more quoting that he needed to get. But I kept on going. But Mr. Customer, unfortunately, we're not done quite yet. Since this is your first remote data center experience, and since my competition doesn't virtualize data, you're going to need to buy WAN optimization as well. Oh, and by the way, you're going to need 2 of those devices for high availability. So 5 weeks later, the customer calls back and says, okay, I have everything now, and you were right. Their total quote came in at $346,000. But when I told them that you were at 305, they came down to 302. Can you do anything for me? Well, since we're in sales and we have to be proper, it's not in my best interest to say what I'm really thinking here. So instead, I said, well, now that you mention it, I see that we're quoting 24 cores. Can you tell me how many my competition is quoting? And he told me 16 cores. So then I continued, well, again, Mr. Customer, we're quoting 24 cores and we have the DVP with compute power on board. I believe you have 16 cores in your current environment. Once you start running backups, replication, and post-dedupe, you're going to have major contention issues and your application performance is going to suffer. So you're going to have to add more cores. They most likely quoted you a core count to win the deal more so than supporting your environment successfully. You see, they charge per core licensing fee, and our licensing is per node or per server. So each core has a license fee associated with it, as does each terabyte. And that's just for 1 year. You have to triple their licensing fee to equate ours. But that's only for now, because as we just discussed, you'll need to add more cores to support your environment. So the customer dejectedly asks, I really don't want to ask, but is there anything else I need to know? And I said, well, actually there is. As you can imagine, with our data virtualization at inception, which compares and eliminates incoming write requests to what's already stored, the longer you use our solution, the more reference blocks you have stored. This means the percentages grow greater each day that we already have the reference block stored. And more requests to store will be eliminated at inception. So we become even more efficient as time goes on. With our competition, each request for write is a write. And backup is done inefficiently with snaps, where with us, the backups are free after the first one. And replication with us is done globally and incredibly efficiently, whereas not so much with them. This all adds up to the HPE Simplivity platform increasing in efficiency the longer you use it. My closing point is this. We are more and more efficient with time, and our competition throws more and more hardware, licensing, and support costs at you over time. So, the lessons to be learned from this are to be consultative. Make sure that you are comparing apples to apples, not apples to oranges. Simplivity has so many features and functionality that are native to the OS that are extra and often not included in quotes from the competition. If you need assistance with this, make sure that you engage a Simplivity evangelist or someone from HPE who understands and can talk about Simplivity. Ask your question about the workloads they're running. There are certain workloads that are not very conducive to being run on a Simplivity platform, simply because they do not compress or dedupe very well, such as video. Video is not a good candidate for Simplivity. So make sure that you qualify your customer carefully and fully and inquire about their workloads. So that's the end of our overview for Simplivity. I thank you very much for your attention and for your time. Good selling. Stay healthy. Stay safe.